Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Cruz Kalari, and I'm really excited to share with you my journal article this week. I'm a student just like you at St. Peter's University in our doctoral program cohort, and also a student in Dr. Milan's class, Accountability, Assessment, Accreditation, and Institutional Research. And this week, I'm really excited to share the article, The Politics of Literacy, Countering the Rhetoric of Accountability in the Spellings Report and Beyond. And it's written by Angela Green. And I'm particularly excited because I think it speaks to my own professional trajectory in higher education. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but really enthusiastic about it. Importantly, Angela Green is affiliated with the National Council of Teachers of English, that is NCTE, and the Conference on College Composition and Communication, often referred to as CCCC. And I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about CCCC because it's a relevant organization and it does some pretty interesting work. And I think Green's article is very much in line with a lot of the viewpoints of CCCC, particularly around assessment, accreditation, the Spellings Report, which we're going to talk about this evening. So the organization CCCC promotes regular meetings and conferences, of course, to bring educators together around a whole host of issues, whether it's conferences or whether it's the organization's mission as a whole. It's really supporting publishing scholarly materials around teaching and learning, particularly as they relate to composition, communication, and rhetoric. But not only those areas, because whatever it is that the English teacher may be doing also has relevance in the majors across content areas to really promote authentic student learning. The organization also works to enhance the working conditions for those teaching in certainly the English discipline, the humanities, but also again in other areas where professors and student affairs educators are really interested in authentic student learning practices. Finally, the organization acts as an advocate for language and literacy education, both nationally and internationally. And I think really that's what Green is doing with this article. She's acting as an advocate, particularly as it relates to responding to the Spellings Commission's report. So why am I so enthusiastic about this article? Well, one, because I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Although I am a college educator and that's my identity and I'm really excited about being a college educator, I started my career as a teacher, a high school teacher. I also taught at the college level in developmental education, in composition programs. I've taught education courses at the undergrad and graduate level, and my identity is one as both an administrator and a teacher. I'm a literacy and reading specialist certified in New York and New Jersey, so that certainly plays a role in my interest. And this identity overall is just in fueling my enthusiasm about what's going on in the college classroom, particularly in the college English classroom, and certainly writing across the curriculum programs, how that is related to assessment and accreditation, and how that's related to all of us. And I know all of us are from a variety of points of view and backgrounds in our class. So to focus on the article, here's a thought. When we talk about assessment, we are most often, it seems, or it feels to me anyway, that we're talking about institutional level assessment and even regional and national level points of view or frameworks regarding assessment and accreditation, and that's great, of course. We should be doing that, particularly those of us in this doctoral program cohort. And I'm always thinking about at the same time, how is this all playing out at the student level? How is this playing out in student affairs programs? How is this all playing out in the classroom? All this talk about accreditation and assessment. And this article really hones in on what's happening in the classroom as it may relate to what I consider some of the external forces laying pressure on the higher education system with regard to accreditation and assessment. And I think that's important. That we really hear from someone like Green, who takes us to the classroom, who takes us a little closer to how students are learning when all this larger conversation is happening nationally around assessment. Importantly, this article asks us to think about literacy in the broadest sense of its application. So many times when we hear the word literacy, we think about reading, and that's not incorrect. But sort of the concept of literacy education is more broad than that. We're talking about reading, we're talking about writing, we're talking about critical thinking, we're talking about effective communication. We're talking about information literacy. We're talking about technological literacy. We're talking about the literacy and the functionality in various content areas for ultimate success in the workplace. And speaking of success in the workplace, we're also talking about things like essential skills, which I'll touch upon on later. But essential skills are really about getting students to be functional in a professional setting as college graduates. And corporate leaders have a lot to say about our students' ability or lack of ability to do those things. So when we're talking about this article and thinking about the recommendations that Green ultimately poses, let's think about literacy in the broadest sense of the term. So we started this semester reading and thinking about the Spellings Report. And Green's article really calls into question the recommendations of the Spellings Report, particularly suggesting that how the recommendations of the report play out will not necessarily be good for students a lot of the time. So in the article, Green first reviews the Spellings Report, and in doing so, she asks us to think about what she calls the economics of education and other political factors to provide some context. So she starts with the idea that education was often or traditionally thought to be starting with an idea that it was the bedrock of a free and democratic society. So as our nation formed, education played a key role in preparing young people and others as time went on to actually participate in our democracy. And in that same vein, education as a way to think about education as a way to increase and maintain social stability and to teach civic values. So to teach young people the values of interacting in groups and in their neighborhoods and beyond. So that's sort of how Green lays the framework for education in its purest forms on one hand. And then on the other hand, the Spellings Report talks a lot about economic competitiveness for the nation and workplace functionality for students. And again, importantly, these points of view do not have to be at odds. But when educational reform is tilted away from student learning to what Green calls the mercantile, we may lose sight of best educational practices and best student development practices for students. So we can continue with the idea that education is a bedrock of a free and democratic society, and that it does enhance social stability, as it also provides economic competitiveness for the nation and workplace functionality for students. So these 2 points of view don't necessarily have to be at odds. Green goes on to cite criticisms of the Spellings Report, and one in particular is her belief, through her citing other researchers, that the Spellings Report conflates social services and business models in higher ed. So again, thinking about social service as something that the college function as, so projecting the model of social services and social good on one hand, while expecting the succinct performance and structure of a corporate model. So these 2 points of view can really become intertwined in a dysfunctional way. Students are certainly a part of their own learning, and the corporate model, although has some definite efficiencies for corporations and some even for colleges in some respects, that at the end of the day, colleges are really not at their best when they're functioning as mere corporations, according to Green. Green goes on to cite another criticism of the Spellings Report, particularly her concern around the National Database of Institutional Effectiveness. And I know we wrote about that as a class a couple of weeks ago. And, we like the idea, or I like the idea, and I know in talking with some of you, of transparency and accessibility for students and parents around how colleges are really performing. But the fear here, according to Green, is that we could reduce college learning to high-stakes tests for the clarity of, say, the metrics of some database that we ultimately create. And the Spellings Report leans heavily on institutional level assessments like the CLA, the College Learning Assessment, or the NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement. And there are some criticisms by researchers around those institutional level assessments, that they're more about perceptions of learning rather than actual learning. So Green asks us to think about authentic assessment, and the researchers that recommend portfolio assessment, where we're tracking how students are growing over time, how the college is contributing to a transformational experience for students, and testing, but testing that's closely aligned with the disciplines and the content in a given department in a given major. Related to that, Green underscores her concern with standardization when she cites how ETS could become involved. Many researchers dismiss this kind of inauthentic testing as capitalistic, done on the backs of students. So ETS charging, say, $25 a head on some national standardized test in a given college major is not, according to some of the research that Green purports, is not really authentic assessment. Green does provide recommendations for how conscientious educators can respond to the proposals of the Spellings report. So one is to fight statistics with statistics, that the job market is bigger than any graduating class. So by that, we have to think about that, yes, colleges are responsible for ultimately students' employability and how students are able to function over time as professionals. But if you graduated in 2007, 2008, or 2009, there's tons of economic research that says that your earnings potential are lower than someone who graduated before or someone who graduated after, because of the effects of the Great Recession on graduating college classes. So that's important. Fight statistics with statistics. Another recommendation by Green is to enlist corporate support for real learning objectives. So to get corporate leaders to say how important it is that college graduates can write effectively, how they can use critical thinking skills and self-assessment, so that as technologies and technical knowledge changes, say for the 2017 college graduate, that same graduate is actually functional in 2020 when a lot has changed in the workplace. Corporate leaders could also be talking a lot about essential skills, which I mentioned previously, like how our graduates can work collaboratively in the workplace and support workplace norms to support workplace goals ultimately. So those kinds of things are important when we think about how we can respond to the Spellings report. Also, Green suggests that we support writing across every discipline, so that writing is the responsibility of not only English teachers but of even biology teachers. So supporting WAC, writing across the curriculum programs at schools, helping to support professional development for all instructors, but particularly for those who do not have a reading background, so that they too can create authentic artifacts of student learning, writing projects, other kinds of language-rich projects that really demonstrate what our students are learning. Green also suggests that we dismantle the rhetorical framework of assessment. So a good example of that would be how, when we talk about assessment and accreditation, we're often using buzzwords like transparency and objectivity, and who can argue with those? But when we peel back the end game of some of those words without a lot of intentionality around what transparency and objectivity really is, that we may be reducing our assessment of students to standardization, and that's not a good thing. The final recommendation is for all college educators, instructors, to continue to assess ourselves and our students responsibly. So that is to say, using rubrics, conferencing with students, not just giving A's, B's, or C's like a lot of us got back in the day on our writing projects, without a real discussion of what that means. So 5 recommendations Green provides for how we can respond to the recommendations of the Spellings report. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with Green, but she gives us another lens, another sort of language set to think about some of the things the Spellings report is asking us to. So in summary, college assessment and accreditation practice, all of this has to be in the hands of educators. We who are the experts in our content, student affairs, English, various other academic affairs disciplines, we know what's best for students, we know what's best for our communities. and we have got to really be the force behind the evolution of the higher education model in the US and the practice of assessment before others external to higher education tell us what we should be doing. Now, we saw what happened in K-12 to greater or lesser extent with No Child Left Behind and other standardization, and the stakes are just as high in American colleges without us really leading the way. So I thank you. I hope this has fostered some critical thinking for each of you, and I look forward to reading and responding to your questions and your comments. Great having a chance to talk with all of you.